I came home just before sunset, suitcase in one hand, keys in the other, expecting nothing more than the quiet comfort of my own front door. I had been away for 10 days, a short trip, nothing dramatic. I didn't call much. I didn't need to. This was my house. Or so I thought. When the key didn't turn, I assumed I was tired. Jet lag, maybe. I tried again. Nothing. I leaned closer and noticed the lock was brand new, shiny, untouched. That's when my stomach dropped. I knocked. Once. Then again. Harder. The door opened just enough for my daughter-in-law's face to appear. She looked surprised, not shocked, more like someone who hadn't expected a problem so soon. She glanced at my suitcase, then at my face, and sighed. "Oh," she said, "you're back early." Early, as if I were a guest. I asked her why the locks were changed. She smiled and said, "We needed better security." Then she stepped outside, closing the door behind her, blocking my way in. That's when my son appeared behind her, silent, uncomfortable, already avoiding my eyes. She crossed her arms and said the sentence that told me everything. "We thought it would be easier this way." Easier for whom? She explained, calmly, confidently, that while I was away, they decided it was time to reorganize things, that I had been traveling too much, that the house was technically under family use now. She spoke like someone reading from a script she'd rehearsed. I asked where I was supposed to go. She shrugged. "You can stay with a friend. Just for now." My son said nothing. That hurt more than the lock. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded, turned around, and walked back to my car. I could feel them watching me, probably relieved that I hadn't made a scene. They thought compliance meant surrender. They didn't know the first thing about me. I drove to a hotel that night and sat alone on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. Messages from my bank. Notifications I hadn't checked while traveling. Subtle changes. Access requests. Address confirmations. Small things most people ignore. I don't ignore small things. That house wasn't just a place I lived. It was the anchor of everything I'd built over 40 years. And I didn't build carelessly. I built like a man who understood that people change, especially family. Years earlier, after watching a friend lose everything to a temporary arrangement, I'd made decisions quietly. Titles, trusts, ownership layers. I never bragged about them. I never explained them. I didn't need to. That night, I made 2 calls. The first was to someone who managed documents I hadn't touched in years. He answered on the first ring. When I explained what happened, he paused, then said something that made me smile for the first time since I'd seen that new lock. They can't do what they think they've done. The second call was to my son. He didn't answer. He texted instead, "We'll talk tomorrow." Tomorrow was already too late for them. The next morning, I returned to the house, not to confront them, but to observe. I stood across the street, coffee in hand, watching them leave. They looked relaxed, confident, victorious. My daughter-in-law laughed as she locked the door of my door and slipped the keys into her purse. I noted the time. By noon, the first response arrived. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet system correction. The kind that makes people pause and check their screens twice. By evening, there were more. When my daughter-in-law called me that night, her voice was tight, controlled. She asked if I'd moved something. I told her the truth. I never moved it. I said, I owned it. There was silence on the other end of the line. And in that silence, I knew something beautiful had begun. I didn't go back to the hotel after that call. There was no reason to. The moment she asked if I'd moved something, I knew the illusion of control was already cracking. People only ask that question when they feel the ground shift under their feet. Instead, I drove to a quiet cafe on the other side of town. Same place I used to meet clients years ago. I sat near the window, ordered black coffee, and opened my laptop. Notifications were still coming in. Access verifications, failed authorization attempts, internal reviews quietly waking up, all because someone assumed possession meant ownership. My daughter-in-law tried again an hour later. This time her tone was different. Polite, almost friendly. She asked if we could talk things through. I told her we already were, just not in the way she expected. She didn't understand yet. Most people don't. They think power is loud, immediate, visible. Real power is layered, boring, hidden inside paperwork no one bothers to read. Years ago, when I bought that house, I didn't just sign a deed and move on. I wrapped it inside a structure designed to protect me from exactly the situation. The house, the accounts tied to it, even the utilities, none of it functioned independently. Change one thing without proper authority, and the rest responded automatically. By mid-afternoon, my son finally called. He sounded frustrated, confused, defensive. He said the bank was asking strange questions, that some services were temporarily paused. He wanted to know if I'd done something on purpose. I told him something he didn't want to hear. I didn't do anything new, I said. I just stopped protecting you. That ended the call. Around sunset, I returned to the house, not to knock, but to sit my car down the street. I watched lights turn on inside. I imagined the conversations unfolding, the checking of apps, the refreshing of screens, the quiet realization that control was slipping and no one knew why. Then the lock stopped matching. At 8:17 p.m., I received confirmation that a formal review had been triggered. Not a complaint, not a report, just a verification process set in motion by irregular changes made without full authority. Neutral, automatic, merciless. My daughter-in-law called again, her voice sharper now. She demanded to know why accounts were restricted. She said they had bills, obligations, plans. I listened, then asked her a single question. Did you think changing the locks changed the truth? She hung up. That night, my son texted me again. We need to fix this. I replied with one sentence. You can't fix what you don't understand. Because the truth was simple. They hadn't locked me out of my home. They had locked themselves inside a situation they couldn't control. And by morning, they were going to realize something far worse. The next morning, I woke up to 6 missed calls. All from my son. None from his wife. That told me everything. When confidence disappears, silence replaces it. She was no longer leading the conversation. She was calculating damage. I returned one call. My son sounded exhausted. He said the bank wanted documentation, original documents, not copies, not explanations. He said the utilities company had paused service changes. He said someone mentioned the word authority. He didn't know what it meant in this context, but he knew it didn't sound good. I let him talk. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I said calmly, You changed the locks on a house you don't control? There was a long pause. He asked me why I never told him how things were set up. I told him the truth. Because protection only works when it's invisible. That afternoon, my daughter-in-law made her first real mistake. Not emotional. Strategic. She contacted a lawyer, who wasn't part of my usual circle, trying to move fast and quietly. But speed leaves trails. And lawyers ask questions their clients don't like answering. That lawyer asked for proof of ownership. She didn't have it. Instead, she had assumptions, verbal permissions, a story that made sense only if no one looked too closely. And now someone was looking. By evening, the tension inside the house was no longer private. Neighbors noticed. A delivery was refused. A service technician left without entering. Small humiliations, the kind that chip away at certainty. I stayed away. That's important. Distance forces people to face their choices without distraction. If I'd been there, they would have focused on me. Instead, they were forced to confront the system. My son came to see me that night. Alone. He sat across from me, hands clasped, eyes hollow. He asked if this could be reversed. Yes, I said, but not by pretending it never happened. He asked what I wanted. I told him something that shocked him. I don't want the house back, I said. I want the truth to be respected. That confused him more than anger would have. I explained that locks are symbols. So are titles. But respect comes from understanding boundaries. They crossed one without asking. The system responded. Not out of revenge, out of design. He finally admitted what I already knew. His wife had pushed for the change while I was away. She said it would be cleaner, easier to manage me if I didn't come and go freely. He had agreed because he didn't want conflict. Conflict arrived anyway. By the time he left, his phone buzzed with a message from her. I saw his face change as he read it. He didn't tell me what it said. He didn't need to. That night, I got an email from the document manager I called days earlier. Next phase initiated. That's when I knew the situation had moved beyond inconvenience. They hadn't just changed the locks. They had triggered something they could no longer stop. The phrase next phase doesn't sound threatening unless you know what it means. To most people, it's just process. To someone who understands systems, it means escalation without emotion. And once escalation begins, it doesn't ask for permission. By mid-morning, my daughter-in-law's name started appearing in places she didn't expect. Compliance emails, verification requests, neutral language that carried quiet weight, no accusations, just questions that demanded precise answers. She didn't have them. I know this because she finally came to see me. Not to apologize, not to explain, to negotiate. She arrived alone, sunglasses on, posture stiff. The confidence was gone, replaced by urgency. She sat across from me and spoke quickly, offering compromises, shared access, temporary permissions, even an apology that felt rehearsed. I let her finish. Then I asked her something simple. Why did you change the locks? She hesitated. Just a second. But hesitation reveals truth. She said she wanted clarity, control, structure. She said it was nothing personal. I nodded and replied, that house was structured long before you arrived. She didn't like that. She warned me about consequences, legal costs, family damage. I told her calmly that consequences were already in motion, and none of them required my involvement anymore. That's when fear finally surfaced, because she realized something terrifying. She wasn't fighting a person. She was fighting paperwork, timestamps, and recorded decisions. That afternoon, the utilities were officially flagged. Nothing dramatic, just reviews, service confirmations, authorization checks. The kind of friction that slows everything down until people start asking uncomfortable questions. My son called again. He sounded defeated. He told me his wife had been up all night refreshing apps, making calls, trying to fix things that wouldn't respond. He asked me to come back to the house and talk. I refused. I don't step into places where I'm not welcome, I said. That silence hit him harder than anger ever could. By evening, her lawyer requested a meeting. Not with me, with my representatives. That told me everything. When people stop trying to intimidate and start asking for procedure, they know they're losing ground. I spent the night quietly reviewing updates. Everything was unfolding exactly as designed. No chaos, no spectacle, just pressure building where it couldn't be ignored. The locks on the house remained unchanged, but inside, the walls were closing in, and they were finally beginning to understand that changing a lock doesn't change ownership. It only exposes who never had it. By the fifth day, the house no longer felt like a victory. It felt like a trap. My daughter-in-law stopped pretending everything was under control. The calm confidence she once wore like armor had cracked completely. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left unread. Advisors who had once been eager suddenly became unavailable. That's how you know pressure is real, when professionals create distance. My son came to see me again, earlier than usual, eyes red from lack of sleep. He told me they hadn't been arguing loudly, just constantly. Quiet panic, whispered accusations. He said she kept asking him why I wasn't reacting the way she expected, why I wasn't threatening or demanding or begging. I told him the truth. Because this was never about emotion, I said. It was about boundaries. That afternoon, the formal notice arrived. Not a lawsuit, not a warning. A request for a clarification sent to multiple parties connected to property and its associated accounts. Banks, service providers, third-party administrators. When several institutions start asking the same questions independently, It means a pattern has been detected. Patterns scare people who rely on assumptions. My daughter-in-law finally broke her silence and called me directly. No confidence, no anger, just exhaustion. She said she was trying to keep things together. She said my silence was making everything worse. I corrected her gently. My silence isn't causing this, I said. Your decisions are. She asked me what I wanted. Money, the house, control. I told her none of those things mattered anymore. What mattered was acknowledgement. She didn't understand at first. People who take without asking rarely admit they cross a line, even when the consequences arrive. I explained that the locks weren't the problem. Changing them without consent was. Acting as if authority had transferred simply because I was away was. She tried to defend herself, said she was protecting her family. I reminded her that protection doesn't involve exclusion. It involves permission. The conversation ended without resolution. That night, my son sent me a message I never expected. I didn't know how much you protected us until you stopped. That's when I knew the lesson had landed. The following morning, her lawyer contacted my representatives with a proposal. A quiet one. No public action. No escalation. Just containment. The terms were simple but heavy. Acknowledgement of overreach, permanent restrictions on access, and a written separation between my assets and their household. She agreed faster than anyone expected. People don't hesitate when they understand the alternative. The locks were changed back that afternoon. Not ceremoniously. Quietly. No announcement. No apology. Just reversal. I didn't return to the house. That part surprised them. My son asked why. I told him something he'll carry for the rest of his life. Once someone shows you they can lock you out, the door is never the same. I chose distance instead of dominance. Peace instead of possession. The house was just a structure. What mattered was that the truth had been restored and authority clarified. By evening, everything was settled. Clean. Final. No drama. The woman who thought changing a lock made her powerful learned something far more expensive. Ownership isn't physical. It's documented, respected, and earned. And once lost, it doesn't come back with apologies. I sat alone that night, not angry, not triumphant, just calm. The kind of calm that comes when a line has been drawn and defended without raising a voice. Tomorrow, I would decide what came next. The morning after everything settled, I drove past the house one last time. Not to go in, not to confront anyone, just to see it for what it really was now, a building that no longer had any power over me. The locks were new again, the curtains drawn, life continuing inside as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. My son called later that day. His voice was calmer than it had been in weeks. He told me they were taking space. He didn't say the word separation, but it was there, hanging between us. He admitted something that mattered more than any apology. He said he should have stopped at the moment they decided to change the locks. I told him I didn't need apologies. I needed awareness. Distance does that. It forces people to reflect without interference. And reflection, when it's honest, reshapes priorities. I moved into a smaller place on my own terms. Not because I had to, but because I wanted control without tension. I kept my routine simple again. Morning coffee, long walks, quiet evenings, no one managing my access, no one mistaking silence for weakness. Occasionally, I heard about her through others. She avoided conversations that mentioned me. She avoided situations where authority was assumed. assumed instead of confirmed. Experience teaches faster than lectures ever could. Months later, my son visited. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't bring excuses. He just sat and listened. That's when I knew he had learned the real lesson. Respect is inherited. It's maintained. People ask me now if I regret not reacting sooner. If I should have confronted them the moment the lock didn't turn. I don't. Because the moment someone shows you who they are, you don't argue with them. You let them continue. Systems reveal truth far more cleanly than emotions ever will. They changed the locks while I was away, thinking ownership could be rewritten in my absence. They didn't know whose name was really on everything. And by the time they understood, the door they closed on me had quietly closed behind them instead.